Hi. I'm Sylvana Sinha, very excited to be here. Thank you, Inakshi, for inviting me. So very honored, honestly, to be here with Ashu. Would love to, I guess, just start out. If you can just tell us a little bit about your journey that has spanned, local and global MNCs and your own enterprises as well.
No, thanks, Sylvana, and thanks, Inakshi and the Asia Society team for thinking of me first and then inviting me. It's a real honor and privilege, and I'm very excited, Sylvana, to learn from your journey. I was just sharing that speeches are not my forte, but I love conversations. And so, this can't be just a conversation this way. With the audience, hopefully we're going to have some fun. Talking a little bit about my journey, I'll start with giving away my age. I have a small career of only 35 years, and I'm a very young entrepreneur because my entrepreneurial journey is all of a little under 2 years. So I clearly qualify to be the youth of today, and that's my spirit, and that's how I like to view things. And with that as the background, I want to share what has been my guiding light and principle over this long journey. And that's really rooted in the simple, humble background that I come from, where my parents really gave us what is most important for anybody. It has nothing to do with gender, but good quality education values, and most important, safety and security at home. Because reality is, where there isn't safety and security at home, then things just go awry. And to top it, we're a family where there are more girls than men. So the concept of gender inequality was alien to me till I joined the workforce, because in our home and our family, mom and 2 sisters outnumbered dad, and then one looked at aunts and all of that, there were only women. So, if you ask me, that is where the whole thought of being very open, candid, straight, say it the way you know it started. See, equal debates with your father and fights with your mother can truly shape one's career. And I'm so privileged to have had that experience, and I continue to have it today. Very strict, so you had to study. Now, you never like it, but once you get down to it, you only realize much later how important that is. And in my time, women taking up finance was unheard of. And I wanted to go down the path of healthcare, which is I'm super excited because you're going to teach me all about it. And, my mom and dad said there are women who are doctors, but finance mein koi nahi hai. So why do you want to do something that everybody else has done? And much as I had my heart set on going the medical path, sometimes there's a trigger to walk a path nobody else has trodden, right? And when you get that advice, when you are getting down a more professional course versus school, it just changes your thought process. And that coincided with my moving from Bangalore to Mumbai. And Bangalore those days was not the way it is today, really sleepy place. I came in for a big shock because didn't know how to cross the road and things like that, and leave alone getting into a train, and no question of autos and taxis, because affordability is a big question. And the second lesson, my dad went overseas for a couple of years because he said, I have to give my girls a better future. Importance, and it sort of locked back much later on why finance and the importance of money. And when I chose to join Citibank versus setting up my own practice, which is the reason why I did CA, by the way, there was a very simple insight. I was very worried that deposit-related conversations, at that age, was done in a very quiet kind of manner. And I'm saying, what's the big deal? I mean, you have to save, right? And those days there were only deposits. And I just felt that banks played such an important role in creating money from money. I mean, I'm giving it to you simple and straight because that will bring us to what I'm doing now and why. And, over a 15-year career, which coincided with Citibank, which coincided literally with a changing socio-cultural context, liberalization of the economy, and the country becoming a little more open to global players and companies, and more importantly, the start of salaries at least covering the month. Because I know when, started working and my husband, our money was over by the 20th. And it was, not easy. What do? You go back to your parents and ask? No. I mean, you just somehow manage. And by the time I was 10 years in my job, the fact that, you could not only happily do deposits, but also ask if somebody else in the family needed support was hugely liberating. And that one simple experience of being able to contribute beyond yourself and your immediate family was that one single factor that my husband would tell me every time I was ready to throw in the towel to quit my job, because bringing up 2 girls was tough. And a Citibank job is a 24/7 job. Meenakshi was my colleague there. She will bear me out on it. There were times I would come home and I would go back because something needed attention. After a long career, it was a bit like manna from heaven when I got the opportunity to become CEO. And I was 37 then. This was the year 2003. And for none other than Fidelity to really set up their mutual fund business in India. And it wasn't something that I was looking out for, but I had presented to this organization Citibank's capabilities, and next morning they called up and asked, would you like to join? And I did ask them why, because I had no background, no understanding. And they simply said, you said 2 things. One, deposits make money, but now times are changing and investments are likely to make more money, and that is why Citibank is a great partner, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that literally came out from the bottom of my heart, because by 2003, capital markets had progressed, and it pained me that deposits would not cover inflation. See, when you're a chartered accountant, you're a bean counter. So you're perpetually adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, right? What to do? Some habits die hard. And at that time, the motivator to take the risk, I was very comfortable where I was, doing well, to literally join a company whose license hadn't come, though it was like the world's largest mutual fund there, is kind of scary. But it's also liberating because I felt I would be able to give back and finally get people to make more money than inflation. Mm-hmm. That's how I learned the industry. So I learned banking because of the deposits. I learned the mutual fund world, the investments world, because it was about beating inflation and having some money after adjusting for all the cost escalations one saw. And then finally, the whole shift into CRISIL as managing director and CEO with no background in ratings. And I again asked them, why me? They said, we do not want somebody who comes from the trade because we want a fresh perspective. I said, I've only been a client. They said, we want a customer insight. and hence the job. And I remember telling them, if you have an insider, don't even bother to call me for an interview, because how will you compete with somebody who knows that trade in and out? And all of this came from that simple thought of being candid, honest, open, didn't matter whether you were interviewing or doing something. And the advice my mom gave me and my dad, that end of the day, you're only as good or bad as your deep driving desire. My deep driving desire was about creating a difference. Difference is not about give back, donation, charity all the time. Every living moment of one's life, you can make a difference. And they would tell me, your deep driving desire decides or underpins your will, your deed, and your deed, your destiny. And that is exactly how the first two happened. And the third happened, and I decided to take up that challenge and completely shifting industries, because I saw that as an opportunity to widen the circle of influence from a policy perspective. CRISIL and S&P as an organization literally have written the rules for capital markets, pushed reform in this country, and it's cutting edge stuff with not always a commercial opportunity. And seeing capital markets, I felt that that would be a great way to honestly, simply give back to a country that I've grown up in. And the 6.5 years there were defining, especially the 2 years in COVID. I think being a CEO during COVID is a life lesson. Nobody knew where it came from. Forget everything that is written. At that point, nobody knew how long it will last. Nobody knew if you would live tomorrow. And leading a team of a couple of thousand people across 7 countries, including countries like Argentina, which had a problem with us sending aid as an employer. And to fight that battle, saying, listen, you know, they can't work, what will they do full day? Or taking umbrage to the fact that we were organizing, you know, other resources, including food, or facing the wrath of employees in China who felt that the team was being a little against them, or struggling with our bureaucracy, saying in India, we need to get oxygen cylinders. How does it matter where it comes from? You know, when I saw all of that, I felt I had to come back to the mission of making a difference. And in my limited way, being a product of what organizations have done for women, I decided that my life would be well spent if I can make that difference in the world of entrepreneurship. Because women in the workforce sponsor others. Women in entrepreneurship can create many, many more jobs for women. They can create organizations that are 360, which is about profitability, and I think being profitable is not wrong. I think it's important. It's almost like survival, right? But if you can take your employees and society along, can you just think about the kind of juggernaut that one would have rolled out? That's what informed my decision to, you know, leave a career which I could have definitely, you know, gone overseas, done larger roles, but it was not about one's deep driving desire at that point. And COVID had a material role to actually remind me that there is a larger purpose and it's an unfinished agenda. That's how Colossa was born, and it's a very simple thing. It's a fund by women for women, funding mainstream businesses, and our objective is to really transform economic agency for women in India and create growth. It's very simple, it's not complicated, and frankly, I don't know complex stuff.
How did you pick the name Colossa?
It's very simple. It comes from the word colossal. And saw the massive opportunity. I'd love to dimension it if you can humor me for a minute. Think about it. India is about a 4 trillion economy today. Roughly 18% is contributed by women. It's about 600 billion. Not small, right? Nobody talks about it, but it's not small. It's only left in some research reports. In our journey towards 10 trillion, and that will happen. We can all argue about when, but it'll happen. And it'll happen faster than we imagine. There is a role of women that will contribute 2 trillion there. If we did nothing, right? If we did absolutely nothing, it would still be 1.5 trillion. Any intervention can make it 2 trillion.
Yeah.
I mean, are we saying a move from 18 to 20 is tough? It isn't. We saw that as an opportunity and also saw that as the area where it was the most underfunded, because less than 2% VC money goes to women founders. And by the way, only about 10% to mixed teams. I'm saying this is like crazy, right? At least if it's mixed teams, do something about it, right? No, but even there it's 10%. So colossal gap. And finally, the price is dramatic, right? So colossal difference that we can make. Mm-hmm. So that's what drove the name.
Yeah.
And another thing, and this came from my time in Fidelity and Citibank. You know, we often in India like names that are rooted in our culture, and that was my natural go-to. But when I sat down and thought about it, and my co-founder is my sister and a lifer in the investing world, and you know the power behind what we are going to unlock, I said we have to have a name jisme dum ho. You know, somebody has to ask me. If I go into explanation in Sanskrit, it means this, that, and the other, I would have lost the plot on the bigness. So we decided that the name has to be something that world over will be understood. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise, India, emerging market, gender, everybody thinks this is charity, this is donation, this is impact, this is bottom of the pyramid, and then you're down one path. That was not something I was going to sign up for.
Awesome. Well, I think you're much better at giving speeches than you think.
No.
That was fascinating.
Your questions have forced me.
No, I could continue listening to you for hours, I think.
But I want to ask you a lot of questions.
Okay.
Remember, I'm learning, and healthcare was my first passion before I got into finance. So would love to hear your journey.
Sure.
You have the most decorated background, but you should tell it in your words. And, you know, even before she starts, I think a huge round of applause for her. Such a privilege to host you here, Toda, in our country. Very
generous of you. Thank you so much. It's a mutual admiration society, I think. So I was born and raised in the United States, and I'm a lawyer by training. I worked in international law and development. I also studied development economics. And actually, one of my summers in college, I worked at ZMODN Partners here in Mumbai, and that was before it was AZB. And so was often very lucky to work for some very extraordinary women in my career. And she was one of them. She was really, I was completely, starstruck by her, I think, when I was 23 years old or whatever I was when I lived here. So I practiced law, and I was in big law in New York City for most of my legal career, and also worked for Obama as a foreign policy advisor in 2007 and 2008. Not because I actually didn't think he would win. I really wanted to work with these women that he hired, like Susan Rice and Samantha Power, and I literally went and flew up to Boston and met Samantha Power, and I said, can you find a role for me? And so I did that part-time while I was still at the law firm. And then when it became clear he was going to win, I started to think, should I join the administration? But I was working on foreign policy, and it's as an American, as a proud American, but also someone with Bangladeshi background, I think I had a little more of a global perspective, and I strongly believe that, don't want to make this all about politics, but the people setting policy in the US government, in foreign policy in particular, have often not spent much time abroad. And I had not spent much time abroad at that point in my life, and I thought I should put my money where my mouth is. So the end of 2008, I moved to Afghanistan with the World Bank. So So I was with the World Bank for most of 4 years, primarily in Afghanistan, but also worked in management consulting in the Middle East and in Thailand, and also worked for the US government in Afghanistan. And it was a fascinating experience. So my plan had been to spend these years and then go back and maybe join the administration after getting this experience. And the driving force for me was also always, well, I would say two things. Number one, I always wanted to work really closely with really senior people and learn from them. I didn't always choose the most prestigious job. I always chose the job where I could learn the most. But also I really wanted to have an impact in my work, and I really wanted it to mean something also. I think that's something similar between us. And it's something that you do see with a lot of female leaders, I think. And our ambition is about, I think, more complex things in many cases. But I grew really frustrated with the policy world. I really had amazing experiences. I fell in love with the country of Afghanistan, but I really disagreed with what the US government was doing there. And I also, I miss the pace of the private sector. I miss the accountability of it. And I really felt, even from my studies, but also from my time, living in these markets, that the really most sustainable force of development was coming from the private sector. And like you said, job creation, right? And so I thought, okay, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? Let me go back to New York, go back to Big Law, and figure out what that's going to be. And around this time, I was visiting Bangladesh for a family wedding, and my mom was hospitalized for a basic appendectomy. And my family history is also relevant and somewhat interesting. My grandfather founded the oldest pharmaceutical company in Bangladesh. It was founded in East Pakistan in 1954. And I really wish he was still alive, because I would love to hear from him how he built his company, because it was built over many decades. And my father moved to the United States in 1964 to get his PhD in pharmaceutical chemistry. And the idea was he would go back to East Pakistan and help his father run the business. But two things happened. My dadi passed away, and then there was a war in 1971, and it was not a great time for him to go back. And he liked America, and he became a professor. And so that's why my brother and sister and I were all born in the United States. But when we were visiting for this family wedding, my mom was hospitalized, and because of the family business, we were in the VIP suite of one of the fancy private hospitals in Dhaka. But frankly, it was a really terrible experience and really eye-opening. The surgery was delayed. There were all kinds of complications. We ended up having to airlift her to Bangkok for a second surgery. And then a year later, she had to have a third surgery in the United States due to complications from the original procedure. Now, because my work had always been in emerging and frontier markets, I knew that kind of academically and professionally, Bangladesh was one of the fastest growing economies in the world. And visually, I was born in the late 70s, right? Visually, I saw the progress that the economy had experienced. I'd seen it in my lifetime, in my visits. And what I saw from this experience was no amount of money could afford you access to high quality healthcare. And that became a problem. I just became obsessed with solving that problem.
Yeah. No, I can relate to it.
And it's interesting, you mentioned the year that you turned 37. That year was also a very important tipping point for me. That was 9 years ago. I'm now 46. So I started the company when I was 37. And I spent a year really digging in, really trying to learn the pain points of the healthcare system, because I'd never lived in Bangladesh before. Spent time on the ground, talking to patients, but also the impact opportunity was very obvious, right? But I needed to learn the business of healthcare. And what was also very obvious to me was that there was a huge financial opportunity. I looked at healthcare systems at scale in countries like India and across Asia, and I saw that publicly traded healthcare systems were actually trading at 2 to 3x of their US counterparts. Yeah. Simply because of excess demand in these markets, right? And so I saw this dual impact and financial opportunity. So I spent that 1 year, going on a global listening tour, writing a business plan, building a financial model, having a crash course MBA, and then moved to Bangladesh a year later. In August of 2014, I started working on the company. August 2015, I moved to Bangladesh, closed my first round of funding at the end of that year, and hired my first employee immediately thereafter. And so today, basically, Praava is a vertically integrated outpatient healthcare system. It's a one-stop shop for outpatient healthcare in Bangladesh. So that includes primary care, secondary care, lab and imaging diagnostics, and pharmacy, both in clinic as well as remote and virtual care. And everything is set up according to international standards. We operate one of only 7 international standard labs in Bangladesh. Just to put that into context, on a per capita basis, India has 55 times that level of international standard labs.
It feels good to hear that, but that 55 is like woefully less than
Still
what
not enough.
a country with 1.3 billion people need.
Yeah, and I mean, and if you compare to the US has 3,400 times on a per capita basis. So the gap is tremendous in both of our countries.
The story of excess, when you think about it, population versus size of countries, they're completely inversely proportional.
Well, the U.S. healthcare system is also broken. That's another story for another time. But so basically, we've now served more than 600,000 patients to date with high-quality healthcare. And COVID was also a huge challenge, crash course, opportunity for us. And I think mostly opportunity, to be honest with you. We came out of it, I think we really stepped up and were able to serve the community in a really meaningful way and earn the trust of the residents of Dhaka. We're now a household name in one of the biggest cities in the world. And so I'm very proud of what we've done. I'm impatient to do more, but I'd like to say we're just getting started.
So how many clinics do you have? Only Dhaka, or is it all over?
So we have one flagship center, which is a 10-story building in Dhaka. We don't have any other clinics. We have collection points. Okay. So we have about 30 collection points, and we can actually collect lab samples from more than half of the districts of Bangladesh today.
So, it's incredible that a personal experience moved you so much, and you've created something that is global standard, and before you got into it, you actually understood it deeply. Very often people like the idea and just get into it, and then the learning journey starts. So it's incredible that you went about it the other way, and it actually shows up in how fast you've been able to scale. So would love to hear your journey as you scaled up, and if you could share with us your experience with raising funding, because that...
I want to hear yours also.
Yeah, and yes. Also, the lowest point and the highest point in this.
Yeah, it's funny. There's this infographic, you can Google it. It's the emotional journey of building anything great. And it's like a reverse normal distribution. And it's like, I find myself at different points on that curve in the same day, right? Like the lowest point and the highest point happens like every few hours, I feel. So to be honest with you, fundraising has been a major challenge for us. I think that much more so than I expected. We reached operating break even for our flagship unit more than 5 years ago, in November of 2018. And I hit the ground running. I went to JPM Help, which is the biggest healthcare investing conference that happens in the world in January of every year in San Francisco. I hit the ground running to launch my Series B raise. I had raised money from friends and family and from angels by then. I had raised about, I guess by then we had raised maybe $7-8 million. And went to JPM Help, launched the raise. And once we before we proved the economics of the business, we'd get a lot of questions, right? You're a first-time founder, you don't know anything about healthcare, this and that, right? All kinds of, and actually, I really enjoyed fundraising in the early days because I used to learn. I would get really compelling questions, and it would make me think about my business in a different way, and it was interesting. Once we proved the economics of the business, it kind of switched. Yeah. And we would get no's for 3 reasons. And those 3 reasons are the same 3 reasons we still get no's. Number 1 is Bangladesh. That's about 65% of the no's. Bangladesh is still not a mainstream investment destination, although it is one of the fastest growing economies in the world. GDP per capita has now exceeded India's for the last several years. It's on track to be one of the 30 biggest economies in the world by 2030, according to Standard Chartered Bank. But, even Temasek, one of the world's largest, sovereign wealth funds, has never invested in Bangladesh. It's a 4-hour flight from Singapore. They are heavily invested in India, but it's just not on a lot of investors' radars. I think Gulf money, what I learned, Gulf money will go as far east as India. Singapore money might go as far west as Myanmar. Guess what falls right in the middle? Bangladesh suffers from a marketing problem, right? And its growth has been so fast. And so it takes time for markets to catch up with that. The second reason that we get no's is that we're not a sexy tech company. And frankly, I don't think a sexy tech company is what will solve the problems of healthcare anywhere in the world.
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't know if you saw the Morning Standard did an article in November called The Pointlessness of Indian Health Tech Startups. And I literally couldn't sleep that week because it was my lived experience. It basically made the argument that after billions of dollars have been invested in health tech in India in the last decade, no problems have been solved and no money has been made. And so you have to solve a problem. And so that's the only way you're going to make money. That's my belief. But a lot of companies that were not solving problems were raising money because they were sexy tech companies. And investors maybe who didn't know healthcare that well were like, well, makes sense. Fine. Number three, the third reason is the investors who really understood our business tend to be later stage private equity players, and we're still too small for them. And so those reasons for the no started in 2019 and continued. And then the pandemic hit. I landed in New York on March 12th, 2020 with investor meetings. I actually was here. I saw Preetha. I was here in India like the weekend before that. And I was in Mumbai. I had a meeting with the family office. And that day, everything started to shut down. And the meeting that I flew to Mumbai for was converted into a call.
After you landed.
Yeah, after I landed. And then I flew to the US, had meetings in Dallas and LA, which also got canceled by the time, and then I got stuck in New York. And we had no money to pay salaries. We didn't pay salaries for 2 months. We laid off 40% of staff.
Very painful.
That was probably my worst day, right? Like firing people is the most painful thing you have to do as a CEO. And you can see why sociopaths make really good CEOs because they don't care. But like, that was terrible. Because also, like you said, for every family, everybody, nobody knew what was going to happen, right? But then quickly we pivoted the business. So we rolled out telemedicine. We had all these resources, right? We had doctors, we had lab technicians, we had phlebotomists. So we volunteered our services to the government. We volunteered our doctors for the government's free telemedicine hotline. We volunteered our staff to collect samples for the government. They were not partnering with any private facilities yet for COVID testing. They were only doing it in their lab. So we just sent our staff to be trained and to help them.
So that you just provide the manpower.
Yeah. And then we rolled out e-pharmacy. And then May 8th, we were one of the first private labs to get approval to do COVID testing for the general public.
Fabulous.
And that saved our business because even just from a cash flow perspective. And it was also free marketing. All of a sudden we were on the 6 o'clock news as one of the only private labs. So I guess probably the lowest and highest points were in those few months, perhaps. Mm-hmm. I think the lowest and highest points are when you let someone down. Right? The lowest point is when you let someone down. The highest, when I have my worst days, my worst moments, I go and read patient feedback and I read employee feedback. And those are my highest points, is like to hear the way that you've been able to change someone's life. And that's really what keeps me going. But yeah, you have to have a really thick skin. I get told no a lot by investors. But I think the important thing is to pay attention to what's happening in the business. And that's what really always kept me going. Like the economics were working, the patients were coming back, our NPS is higher than 85, and word of mouth, like our CAC kept going down and is still now at its lowest point ever. And so, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that does, but I'm very curious.
Yeah.
And it links to the kind of no's we receive. Every single DFI has Bangladesh included.
Oh God,
healthcare and impact included. So I'm saying if all of them have Bangladesh, they have impact and they have healthcare, then what was happening?
Yeah.
Why wasn't the money coming?
So I spoke at the IFC's Global Health Conference last February in Cape Town. They have evaluated our deal 3 times. Every time they come back and they say that we're too small. And I'll tell you, I met Ajay Banga in last September, and I said this to him. The DFIs are not taking risk, and the IFC is the worst culprit. So in healthcare, they're not leading rounds, number 1. Number 2, they're following private equity deals, and sometimes crowding out private equity players. They're not taking any risk. Sorry. The ADB is even worse. The ADB keeps coming to our events and following us, and the ADB guy, we had an event in New York in April of 2022, and they joined from Manila in the middle of the night. They joined the whole event. It was like 4 hours, and then they emailed me afterwards. They said, it's so awesome, like, you know, we love seeing the progress. Oh, by the way, the ADB and the World Bank Group are our clients. We provide healthcare for all of their employees. And
Brilliant. Do they fund you?
No, they pay us for the services, but they don't fund us. So then the ADB guy writes me, and he said, it's so great. We will become part of this one day. I wrote him back. I said, wonderful. What metrics are you after, just so we can keep it in mind? He said, oh, we're looking for 3 years of net profit. So I said, okay, first of all, if I had 3 years of net profit, why would I need their money? Number 1. Number 2, I have a country of 170 million people. Why am I going to have net profit? Like, every time I have positive cash flow, I reinvest it in the business because I want to serve more patients. So I have so many strong opinions about this. I believe the DFIs are failing us. I think we need a new asset class for healthcare.
Yeah. No, so delighted to hear that, because what they tell us...
Yes, that's what I want to know.
Okay, you're not impact. India has progressed, so you're no longer on that list. You're not underdeveloped. You've moved from developing, but you're not developed. But therefore, you don't deserve it. And, you know, gender and non-impact don't go hand in hand.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And I'm saying, but the last time you said you have an allocation for a mainstream fund, I'm a mainstream fund.
Right.
They said, but you're leaving half the deals on the table because you're focusing on women founders. And, you know, you look at people and you're saying, what part of the presentation don't you get? Because, and I asked this question, and hence, so I asked them, you have a large allocation to healthcare. What about the opportunities in fintech? Aren't you missing out on that? They said, no, but that's a segment focus. So I said, I'm a segment focus? So, you know, believe you me, sometimes I've come back asking myself, maybe I have a communication problem. And then I decided to tell people, you're asking me these questions which you would not have dared to ask me in my previous role.
Yeah.
On data, on metrics, on viability. And I did ask one person, what has changed?
I mean, I feel like, well, I mean, I don't want to make this a critical session about DFIs, but it's like they're not really trying to do their jobs, they're just trying to keep their jobs. And there's always a reason for no. So the more they ask you, the more they can say, whereas if it's a climate tech fund, this is what I think, you should do a climate tech fund for women.
No.
And they won't care.
No, so now here's the fun part. So like you said, no, you hear all the no's, so you realize how you should begin answering, right? But I'm very averse to it because I've grown up being straight, honest, and in your face with the answers, because I do not believe in trying to provide a different answer 2 years later or 3 years. Mine is a 10-year fund. So much will evolve. I mean, how many times will I change the pitch? And when they start, and this is not about DFIs, but investors in general, it doesn't matter whether it's a DFI, family office, or whatever, when they realize that you had an answer for most of the questions, they came down to first-time fund manager, first-time fund, like first-time. And after, you give, because my co-founder has 25 years of investing in VC and PE, so, a solid track record. I would have built some 11, 12 businesses, sold businesses, bought businesses, all of it, right, which qualify, right? And we all by then had learned how to create those very complicated spreadsheets. Then it was about, let's do this, come back after your first close. So I said, brilliant. If everybody is going to say that, then how is the first close going to happen? And how is a first-time manager going to become a second-time manager? But truth be told, we decided, between my co-founder and I, that we will raise that first 100 crores. And I must tell you that how much ever we might crib India bureaucracy, very happy to share that it was a family office in India that gave us the first check even before approvals came, and an Indian institution that cut the largest check. Of course, they asked us 10,000 questions. So, end of the day, how much ever we might crib, honestly, your home country is your best place to win. And I can say that today, after having done first close, and we decided to make the announcement on the eve of International Women's Day, because I said, everybody celebrates. It's time for us to celebrate, and hopefully when we go back to those who said first close, I'm sure they'll have another, question, but at least we've addressed this.
Right. That's awesome.
And, thank you, but you must hear this part. In that, we also wanted to solve for the global investors, saying home market has supported us on a theme that is on the global SDG list and on the global investing list of everybody. Now that I have home market support, can we begin talking? And let me tell you, the journey has not finished. It's just started. And I know it's going to be a long haul, but this is for everybody. This is not about Ashu. This is not about Colossa. This is about changing the dialogue. And a dialogue is two ways. So I'm committed to dialogues for the rest of my life, because that's the only thing that's going to drive change.
I totally agree. Thank you so much. I mean, if women participated in the global economy at an equivalent level as men, we would contribute $26 trillion.
Absolutely.
Which is larger than the size of the US GDP. Yeah. So thank you for being part of helping us to create more women entrepreneurs.
And thank you for being that woman entrepreneur that investors must back. And in healthcare,
but honestly,
what is there not to back? I mean, I'm really struggling with the whole thing, but
it's
anyway.
It's not sexy and it's complex. I think that's it, right? Like the journey of venture capital into emerging markets, it doesn't start with healthcare. It starts with fintech and e-commerce, which are, asset-light businesses.
But healthcare is a big area of focus for us because of
wonderful
many experiences during COVID. And so anyway, maybe we should ask our friends.
Yes, absolutely.
Otherwise, we can go on.
Yeah, we can go on. So why don't we open it up for questions? Who wants to be the brave one? Yes. And please introduce yourself. Also, we'd love to hear who's here.
Yeah, I'm Piyul Mukherjee. Both of you, while you were speaking, mentioned that VCs or, they found you to be too small. Don't you see that as a very big issue? That, they just want to enter and they also want to exit quickly. And, when they talk tech, they're not actually talking real technology. It's all online tech. So in terms of the, putting in the hard yards, which I do believe women can do so much better, I don't think that their metrics are even correct. I mean, look at this whole thing of talking size.
No, that's a brilliant question, and I've argued that. Cows have also come home, but, the answer is still sinking in. But the bottom line is, there is safety in numbers. So herd mentality in the stock market, safety in numbers, it's all operating in the comfort zone.
Sorry, the other thing is that most of the people you deal with are not the guys who make the money. They are the 9 to 5 salaried people, isn't that so?
Yeah, no, that is true. Having said that, we've encountered some really wonderful investors, but there's a second part to the size. So the size, the simple, plain, honest explanation is that. But the tech, thank God for the corrections that have happened finally, not just India, world over. Yeah. People are down to real businesses, they're down to real metric. And initial time of our pitches, they would all ask me about tech. And I would say, sure, tech in healthcare for us is a new treatment plan, a new drug, because that is technology. In the world of climate tech, it is about having that solution to the problem of CO2 levels. And, bit by bit, everybody has come around. And think about it, the whole tech wave is herd mentality. Mm-hmm. So I do believe that we're at a point where, the hype, the hubris has kind of settled down, and the metrics are real. And I am actually very hopeful to see money really going towards, the more sustainable businesses, and whether it is a VC or PE, going back to what I would call banking type analysis. Mm-hmm. Frankly, a lot of founders tell us you'll have very difficult as a VC to deal with. I said yes, because unfortunately we're traditional banking type old women. And as old women, we'll ask about every single line, because that's a very women thing. If there is even a slight doubt, we'll get to the whole threadbare comes with the way we operate, right? But the beauty of it all is it makes the founder also a lot more confident, and of course gives us that conviction that she's really somebody to back. Because one of the challenges when you take up a mission like this is it's not about your success, it's about the success of the founders, because we need those role models. So our success is in creating those role models and creating that snowball effect. Otherwise, it's a mission not achieved, frankly. For us, it's not going to be the returns we deliver. It's about the role models that we must create. And that's what really keeps me awake at night.
So I think I'll just say one thing also on the point about asking questions. I'm not always in the room when men are pitching, so I don't really know what the difference is between when I pitch or when they pitch. But one time this was during the pandemic, I had an investor call with 3 older white men, and I asked one of my existing investors, who is a not as old white man, who's a US-based founder, healthcare founder, to join the call, just, to lend his perspective, his experience, why he's an investor. And it was a first call. It went on for an hour, and then I got off the call, and my investor texted me, and he said, "That was insane." He said, "Can you talk?" So, I was shocked. So I said, "Sure, let's talk." And I said, do you have some feedback for me? If anything you want to share? He said, "No, I've never seen a founder grilled like that in a first-time call." And I do think that we get asked harder questions, but I think that's better for us. I always tell young women who want to start companies, you're gonna get held to a much higher standard, but that's gonna make you a better founder. That's why women-founded businesses are more profitable, because we have to work that much harder, but that ultimately makes us better leaders, and I actually appreciate that.
No, 100%. I think if a founder, male or female, if they cannot answer the questions, then they don't deserve the check. But you're absolutely right, women do get grilled a lot more. And that was also an insight where we decided that we will think about what's a better way to draw out some of the answers, because they are there. Not everybody is able to communicate and bring it out. And guess what? The templates in VCP, because you don't have those many women investors. So in any committee, the whole mindset, and this is not about discrimination or bias at all, because Money chases money. I mean, let's be clear about that. But it's about you want to hear something. You want to hear a few words. Only then that conviction builds. And, it's an early phase for women in the world of entrepreneurship. It's not something that it has happened forever, but at a very different scale. And we want to operate at the next scale. So that learning curve is still there. And that's the difference between a first-time founder and a second-time founder. Second-time founder, I have a reverse problem with that because they give you answers you want to listen. So we hear them and say, now leave your deck, can we talk? And then you know the truth. So it's it's a wonderful time, right? And every meeting, when I come out so much wiser and so much more learned. So absolutely, the whole grilling thing, but he was really nice to admit it. Not everybody wants to admit it.
Yeah, that's true.
Hi, myself Deepa Chawla. I am a chartered accountant, and I have a very generic question. I mean, when women tend to be aggressive, they are aggressive. When men are aggressive, they are assertive. And what I have felt at workplace in last almost 2 decades is, I have been very aggressive as a professional, but it's been appreciated very late in the life when I'm getting those products turned around when none of the men could do. So I don't know, if somebody has to take my case, this is one thing that I would get to know, that, it gets too hard for people to deal with you. But when it comes to tough task, it definitely is Deepa here. So with the bunch of experience that you both esteemed speakers have, is there a better way to deal with it? Part A. Part B, are you seeing the world changing? Because you all have dealt with it for so many decades.
It's a brilliant question. And the elephant in the room is unconscious bias. So everything that you've experienced, I'm sure both of us have also experienced. Sometimes you've got to just become thick-skinned. But the reality is, see, our brain is just hardwired, right? What men or women have seen over the years just goes and sits in that repository. And awareness doesn't come automatically. So, over generations, men have learned to see women differently. So if somebody is just forceful, assertive, you choose whatever adjective, it's not natural. So that's the explanation. Is it a good thing or bad thing? Well, the fact is, over time, it has changed, which is why now even you're using the term aggressive versus assertive. A decade ago, you wouldn't have said this. We're all learning. And the way, I think about it, it's a much better environment today for women. Workplaces are a little more safer than back then. There are policies that are more supportive. I mean, maternity time, 3 months including illness. And if you have had a bad pregnancy, then God help you. Leaving a 2-month-old and going to work was my time. Today, you have 6 months, then you have sabbatical, then you have something else, and then you have something else. No such luxury back then. But let me give you the best sort of change that has happened. If after maternity, one couldn't come back in my time, you were asked, do you want to work or not work? Whereas today, mostly people are said you need more time, you can take a sabbatical, leave without pay, etc., etc., etc. So huge change, but is this bit around the expectations having moved fully of how you are supposed to behave, or what we call stereotyping? It's beginning to change, but things of the brain or the psychological aspects take much longer than what data tells you. Data tells you workforce, women not enough, so people will take policies. How do you take a policy action or a legislative action on what's going on in the brain? So the short answer to it as women, we just need to promote those many more women. We need to keep talking about it and become very thick-skinned and push ahead regardless. It doesn't matter what comes in your way. There is no, frankly, in my opinion, but you've seen it, and you've seen it in more difficult markets. An example from Afghanistan, I think, will help all of us, because we all have a different view, and in that sense.
Well, I think, what you've said is very true, right? There's nothing nothing anyone can say to dispute that. It's true, maybe, hopefully. It's a little bit less true than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. But all you can do is your best. And I think that's what you can control, right? Is that the work you're doing is the best that you can produce, that it's reviewed, supported by data, that you are proud of and can stand behind and justify your work product. I do think that these biases that exist in workplaces in many environments, and they sometimes prevent. You have had a very traditional career in a lot of ways, right? Like I did, but I also moved around, and some of that was because of these challenges. And I think you do see more women, largely because of the path being paved by people like Ashu, who are starting their own companies because they're not finding the traditional path is working for them. And so you may find the best thing you can do is start your own company. And that's sort of part of what also inspired me to finally start my own company, is I wasn't finding the opportunity that challenged me in all of the ways that I wanted to be in another organization that existed for me. I will say about the Afghanistan thing, foreign women in a country like Afghanistan are like a third gender. And actually, I found I could use it to my advantage. Because you can be aggressive and charming and get information. And actually, I found that was one of the only places I've ever lived and worked where I could use it to my advantage. Of course, you have to live in a social contract, you cover yourself, and you don't disrespect the culture that you're in. But I think, I really thought that women were treated as a third gender. I wasn't an Afghan woman. Right? I think that's also a different experience. One of my best friends is the most successful woman entrepreneur from Afghanistan, and her experience was very different than mine. But as a foreign woman, it was very interesting. Bangladesh is an interesting case as well. We have a woman prime minister, of course, but I also came to Bangladesh as neither an insider nor an outsider. Right? My family was from Bangladesh and somewhat a known quantity. But I never lived there before. People didn't really know who I was. I was wildly underestimated, and I think that worked to my advantage. Nobody saw me coming. Everybody, I think, in retrospect, they were like, this little girl's never going to figure this out. 37, I was not that young, but it's also an ageist society, right? And so that totally worked to my advantage, because then we did the work, and then we opened our doors, and they're like, oh, shit, they know what they're doing. Yeah. And then we started to face the challenges and the competition. But actually, I think I'm grateful for that, because it gave us the time to lay low and under the radar.
So I have a question for the audience, because this is a dialogue and a conversation. In my life, I've had a lot of men as supporters, allies, not just home, but even in the office. If it weren't for my husband, I think I would have quit many years ago, beyond my parents, and my dad has taken leave to babysit, as has my mother-in-law and father-in-law. But the bosses at work, played a very material role, especially at a time when the policies were not supportive. So we have men in the audience. I would want a perspective on this whole discussion. Yes, it is gender matters, but it's also about representing the world the way it is in every walk of life. Because I'm not an anti-institution person. I don't think it can be work at the cost of family, because lots of times the whole dialogue goes the other way. So I'd love for our male friends to throw some light on what they think on this topic and what's their perspective.
Don't be shy.
Yeah. I had a question for you regarding this. Manish here and been working with startups, MSMEs and social organizations, helping them raise funds. My question is, why are you focusing just on women? I got it. I mean, it's a women-created fund, so gender is there, okay? And you can create role models. Male role models also can be created. Why only women? Why creating a gender bias? Yeah. I mean, and you've headed organizations mixed ones, so why?
So I'll give you the very short answer, but you have to answer the question I posed, okay? Yeah. So I'll give you the answer, in return I want that. The short answer is the gap in funding is glaring. Okay. If 2% of VC money is going to a sole woman founder and only 10% to mixed teams, at a time when 20% of MSMEs are women founded, and you can take a number anywhere between 20 to 45% of startups are women founded. What explains the funding gap, right? And people have asked me on this on performance metrics. Am I choosing the right company? Am I ignoring half? I'm saying, दुनिया पड़ी है male founder को पैसे देने के लिए, go there. But let me tell you, performance metrics stack up very well. So it's about opportunity. I am not at all coming at it from gender. I'm coming at it as a hardcore capital market person. Underinvested, underfunded, underestimated. Because people tell me, like she said, wo karegi kya? I'm saying this is ridiculous. So it's very simple. Emerging trend, put in your money and make money. And as a result of taking a very simple, cold-nosed capital markets approach, I have enough and more data to the impact this is going to create. I don't have to go marketing impact. I will go marketing the opportunity and returns. Very clear. And I come at it having led organizations
who are mixed
and making sure I have enough women in my leadership team and in the board because they create value. Full stop. I mean, I'm not at all coming at it from any other
So you have your metrics in place, so that is there.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I cannot ask you anything anymore. Thank you.
But you have to give me the answer.
Okay.
Well, actually, maybe, I think the answer...
No, see...
And also, what brought you here today? I'm also curious.
Okay, see, I have been into this capital market for last 25 years and into this VC fundraising now. So women, I mean, we've always seen, this is a debate kind of a thing, that men always succeed and women don't. So we have our side to say. So, women succeed. And many times. And I think that's very, very individualistic. So, but when I saw a profile like this, a women fund, experienced the funder and wanting to focus on women. So I had this kind of a question, why women per se? That's the only thing. I mean, I think it's all individualistic. You cannot say, okay, when you're going on data, yes, women suffer a lot. So data, yes. Okay, thank you.
Very insightful talk, just to be able to understand.
I think that woman has been waiting maybe his after.
So tell me one thing. I agree and I absolutely believe what you said right now. But as a manager or as a fund manager or as a person who's hiring, if I have candidates, if I am being gender neutral, I'm being gender neutral. If I want to hire someone for my team only based on merit, only based on their candidature and merit, we are seeing very few, like in my fund, for example, like the ratio is 2:8, like 2 out of 10 employees are women. So how do we make sure the supply of women is... demand, like we can talk about the demand, but how do we work on the supply of women in the workforce? That's one question or...
So, happy to share my thoughts on this. Firstly, I'm in the camp of saying the best person should get the job. Okay? However, if both are equal, then it's time to actually take the bet on the woman because the numbers are just stacked against. Otherwise, we will not change the supply side at all, right? So I want to put the competence question to rest. I don't think anybody here would sort of put gender above metrics or competence. There are a lot of issues when it comes to the supply side. Some can be solved for and some can't be solved for. Okay, the can't be solved for is simple. If a woman chooses to be a caregiver or housewife, that's a choice and we should respect it. And the reason I say that, and I'll also come to this whole employment data, I mean, world over, women who work at home, why isn't their contribution counted? It's a 24/7 job. And there should be a monetary value to it. Because you put a monetary value to it, all the metrics world over will change. Just because the unit is a family and it's taken for granted that, you know, these tasks are to be done by women, we sit here in all these meetings and have this conversation. Had an opportunity to host Mr. Kamath, and he was vociferous on this. He said it's time the world moved and started adding that data. So that's one side of the choice. The second aspect is also work conditions. You know, we are talking about big cities, and I said, I mean, I remember my journey, you know, 35 years ago. I mean, you sit late, then you really worry, and Bombay still is safe, but when I used to go to some of the places, you just don't feel safe, right? Lots has changed. So there is a socio-cultural change that needs to still happen. I think the awareness has been built and, you know, the change train has left the station. And then there is a third aspect. And that aspect, I think women have to solve for themselves, which is this mother-in-law problem. I mean, believe you me, I feel really bad saying this. I, for the life of me, cannot understand why mother-in-laws can't be supportive of their daughter-in-laws. I mean, if you don't sponsor women at home, who on earth is going to take up that baton? And I've written on this topic, and, you know, much to the displeasure of many. But, I mean, give me a break. We can keep, and that's why I wanted men to talk, because half the problem is also women. And I'm saying half because in a family, mother-in-law to is half, na? So I'm just hoping that the people in this room, when they become mother-in-laws, or if they already are, I just hope like hell the thought process is a little more thoughtful. I don't want to say traditional, contemporary, because that's judgmental. But thoughtful, I think there's no judgment in it. So that is the third aspect of the big supply side problem.
My name is Shweta Junjunwala, and to add to that, I would rather have a woman not work than cook at home, come to work, again cook at home at night. It's okay, don't work. You can work at home, you're working enough at home. That's my belief. I mean, I've been a career person all my life. Also the point about the Women Fund. Unless we have enough opportunities for women, where we don't need a fund like that, we will have to do those funds. That's what I believe. Because we have to create opportunity for women to come and do what they need to do. So I have a question for you. We watch all these panels, and a lot of these panels are only men. So we call them manels. We don't call them panels, and we call them out. They're not a panel, it's all men, so it's manel. And oftentimes the person who's organizing the panel, either they're not thought about it, it's not intentional. They just chose the right people for the right conversation. And sometimes, and when you go and point it to them, they're like, oh, we didn't think of it, too late now. But I believe that there has to be some solution, some way for them to make sure that women are included so that eventually that number changes. Because by nature, we are the kind of person, oh, it's okay if it's not included. It's okay if you didn't put my name on the brochure or flyer. A man would not say that. A man would say, my name has to be on the brochure or flyer, right? So how do we change that? And I don't want to blame. It's not about blame. There has to be a better way of doing it, no?
I mean, I think you have to keep calling it out. Like what you said, right? Like, it's true, no more manels. We should have no more manels. I was at JPM Health like last year, the healthcare conference I mentioned that happens in San Francisco every year. And JPM Health is very US healthcare focused, there's less and less, unfortunately, less and less focus on global health, even though we lived through the greatest global health crisis of our lifetimes. So it was quite disappointing. But this was a panel on global health, 9 white men. I was like, what is this? I was like, this is insane. Like, and the only thing you can do is call it out to the organizers. I mean,
But
we can't.
It's already too late, right?
Yeah, for that one,
Yeah.
but not for maybe the next one they'll remember. I mean,
There's a lot of female founder groups in the South that we are part of, and we've been calling it out endlessly. In fact, even recently there were, all she mentioned names, but names like Startup Mahakam, and these kind of names, SaaS Boomi and whatever. Everywhere, every time there's a panel, if you notice, this year it's far better. Last year it was called out a lot of other groups. So it is happening.
but you have to say it. I mean, I will say like, and then the other thing that bothers me is, well, in America, I'm also American, right? America loves female founders who start beauty and fashion businesses. Like it's an obsession, you know, and it's obnoxious. There are women starting investment banks. There are women starting funds. There are women doing incredible things in all sectors. So there are biases at all these levels, right? And all we can do is call it out.
And America has a different issue in terms of the color also, right?
Yeah.
It's the white men versus the men of color.
You know, sorry to disappoint you, but the funding metrics for the US is no different.
Yeah, it isn't.
And if you took the ethnicity cut, then it's like really bad. That way, I feel happy that we don't have that ethnicity bias, at least in India. And at least what I'm seeing today, and maybe it's also deliberate, I'm seeing enough and more young founders come from tier 2, tier 3 cities.
Yeah.
The only thing is at some point they end up relocating to a larger place because then access is a challenge. But I personally think that will change because they'll find that the cost of running their business from a solar, it'll sort of bridge that gap. You're better off taking these flights always. And the hybrid work environment that is here to stay post-COVID, if you ask me, is the biggest boon for women. And to take the panel question head on, my experience has been very different. Maybe it was finance, maybe what, I don't know, but never bothered to notice, am I the only woman in a panel or whatever, maybe because it's almost like work focused, right? I'm on this, I have a job to do, and then I'm out of here.
So we're also probably the only women in a lot of places.
So let me share. I had the same thing until somebody pointed out to me.
Yeah.
I never thought about it. Like at PepsiCo, they told me to be a sponsor for women of color. I'm like, women of color have no issues.
Yeah.
A month later, I realized and understood the problem.
And the good thing of being unaware is then you're not conscious.
Yeah.
Okay. And the other thing, we have to also really take on board that the change is relatively recent. Right? So, with all due respect, where we are today is 100x better than 3 decades, maybe 20x better than the last decade, and hopefully it will continue. I think what I feel really good about having 2 girls, I think they're living in a much better environment, a more open environment, and they're very in your face, a lot more than I would like, but good. Honestly, I'm the first one to say damn good because I couldn't possibly completely turn and say what rubbish. I wouldn't. But that's nice because that's how it is. And we're in a good point in time, honestly. And if at the heart of it, we all just think about the world as a unit and just reflect that in everything we do. You know, whether it is governance, whether it is gender, I just feel we'll be a more resilient human race. Otherwise, human race itself has a problem. Because think about it, if women start becoming the other way, where is the human race? Just for a minute, take a step back, right? If every woman in this world decides that she's going to be exactly like a man, there is no human race after 1,000 years or some number, I've not done the math. So balance is the way to go.
Hi, sorry. Last question, and we are closing.
I have a friend who's a male friend who said he doesn't want to employ younger women who are going to get pregnant in the near future. As in, yeah, we were your friends chatting, and he's a business owner, and he said, I don't want to employ a girl who I know is family planning because of the maternity leave. I don't want to be forced to take 6-month maternity leave, and what if she doesn't come back? And somewhere I got what he's saying. I mean, okay, obviously as a woman, I was like, I get it from a profit point of view. So how, I couldn't convince him, but how would you say to that?
So I'll tell you my experience. In my first year, I had 20 employees, and most were actually women. Every single woman on my team from age 22 to 42 got pregnant. I'm not exaggerating. So it really challenged me as a woman leader who wanted to support women. But we figured it out, and I'll tell you, working mothers are some of the most productive professionals I have ever worked with in my life. They are so efficient. That would be my answer. Because they just get stuff done. They have only so much time in the day, and they get it done more quickly than anybody else, and they do a better job. That's my experience.
And then what about the business owner having to pay maternity leave and having to pay another person to kind of, cover up?
Well, it's an investment. I mean, I think that's an investment. That person, that's also a contribution to society. What are we going to do if women don't have babies anymore?
So 2 things.
I mean,
yeah. So one, it's about the extinction of the human race. Please, everybody remember that. And I hope that will motivate you every day to think differently. But the short answer to that question is, yeah, you look at expenses, that's one way of looking at it, but it is about investment, and eventually every male manager gets it because they know eventually what work or output happens. But there is one very fundamental reason why ESG and the S has gender subsumed in it beyond everything else, because diversity is not just gender but everything. Because people have realized that you have to carry everybody along. So I do think businesses of the future are more mindful. And it is like that change train. So it's happened with the gender piece. Hopefully the thinking will become more inclusive, because I always feel that eventually when the metric says with a better balanced team you have more profits, then...
Yeah, I'll just make one last point. 80% of consumer decisions are made by women. So if you don't have women on your team who are helping you to develop products and services that understand the woman consumer, you're going to fall behind.
I'll tell you a funny story. Now, I'm on the board of a FMCG company, and I was just thinking, and I asked this quite bizarrely. I mean, where do you get your insights on detergent? Otherwise, how do you know it's going to come out right? Obviously, women. And obviously, there's no surprises for guessing that organization is, if not equal from a gender perspective, nearly there. Because otherwise, how are you going to serve the customer? Imagine I really want to ask, how many men can answer the question on which detergent, whatever that Lalita
Did you know
this thing was there?
only in August, they started testing tampons on actual menstrual blood.
Yeah, I know.
It's incredible.
Because I did ask another company, how do you solve for sanitary napkins? Firstly, everybody cringed. I said, hello? I mean, what did I ask wrong? They said, no, it's a real problem. And I can go on this, but we think about consumer and we think about women because the connection is natural. But I do not know how many of you know the story behind chairs. It's my favorite, and it's also one of the reasons I am doing what I am. Most women have backaches, right? General answer is pregnancy, weak bones, too conscious, diet, some rubbish like this. But the bottom line is the design of the chair, and it is documented evidence. Please go back and read. is for the male body type. And to make it worse, it's for the non-Asian body type. There are 2 companies in the world that are a little more sensible. And in my, I had a really bad back problem, and my boss fixed it because he got me a chair which was more friendly for a woman, and that solved my problem. No doctor. I mean, I was on medication for like 6-7 years. So I just went back and said, this is a massive business opportunity. Every chair manufacturer, if they introduce one chair...
Female founder? Was it a female founder?
No. Just a smart founder.
Just a smart founder. Oh.
But I'm just saying, it's so bizarre.
Yeah.
I mean, just think about it, right? You're blaming pregnancy and some calcium and some this thing. Are just fix the chair? So on that.
That's a fascinating. I have one, I'm pulling rank here, but one last question. Since this conversation was about fundraising and capital, and Sylvana, I want to direct this question to you, and Ashu, feel free to chime in as well. But in retrospect and in hindsight, if you had to build your business again, and based on the many years of experiences that you've garnered in, facing panels with white men and all kinds of men and women and whatever else, what would those key what is the kind of advice you'd give to other female entrepreneurs trying to scale up and build up businesses? What would you do differently?
Yeah, it's a great question. And my answer is a simple one that may not make people happy to hear. And I was quoted in Forbes, actually, in December with this statement, which is that I would hire a white male co-founder if I could do it again. It's a sad truth. It's pragmatic. It would have been easier for me to raise money. I know that. Yeah, it is what it is. And you said, when you were talking about first-time founder, second-time founder, I was like, that's what I'm going to do next time. Yeah, that's the truth. I mean, I think that there are a lot of other lessons I learned as well along the way. I think very positive ones. I think like chasing every contact to its logical conclusion, being prepared. Like being prepared is the thing that will serve you. Like chance favors the prepared, right? So you mentioned Omar Ishraq. Omar Ishraq, who sits on the board of the Asia Society, is one of my investors. 6 years to close him on investing in my company. But I chased him. I would show up wherever he was. I would meet him. He would give me time, and he became a mentor to me and a friend. And finally, he became one of my investors. And he's the most successful Bangladeshi businessman in the world. He was the chair and CEO of Medtronic and the chair of Intel. So persistence. All of those things are also wonderful lessons that I've learned. But yeah, I think that the thing that could have made a difference is...
Thank you for being so honest. And Ashu, I hope that you can change that narrative. I hope no female entrepreneur needs to say that I need to get a white male.
I would not change anything because it was a very deliberate thought after a lot of research. Because I also looked at an MFI like in 2012, etc., but then decided that you have to be mainstream. If you want to make this whole thing a mainstream conversation rather than a room full of women, then you have to start somewhere. And I think having those many more successful women entrepreneurs can make all the difference. So I would not do anything differently. Maybe if I started again, I may have some different questions and I may learn how to answer them quicker, but that's about it, I feel. Because, hearing a founder being asked the questions, I mean, eventually, you're the provider of capital. So the whole thing is not to ask the questions. And that is one of the things that we do differently in terms of how we assess businesses.
I'd like to ask a question. A woman entrepreneur, founder, talking to a woman investor, and you said your company is only 2 years young. Have you already invested in any sort of business, and what's the profile you look out for? And since I have not seen you in your office, what are the kind of brilliant questions you would typically ask? It would be great to know.
Sure. So we've just started investing. We've done 2 very interesting companies, and everybody should be thrilled knowing them. One is an aerospace woman founder, aerospace engineer turned woman founder, who's created an electric two-wheeler whose mileage is 2x everybody else. So I just rest my case.
What's the name of the company?
It's called Vyoma Motors, and they will go into production by the end of the year. I mean, don't rocket science, what's the point? I mean, the outcomes are so obvious. The second is a company in the medical devices space. They are the only company in the world, again, the founder is a woman PhD who used to be principal scientist at the most coveted chemicals company in India. It's the only company in the world, or probably amongst maybe 2 or 3, that has cleared clinical trials using silk as a material for bone repair and tissue repair. So for everybody who thinks that women can be only consumer oriented, or maybe to push it healthcare, because that's what one investor told me, if it's not consumer, maybe they get health. I said, what do you mean maybe they get health? I mean, hello. Our thought process is very simple. We want to know what's driving the founder to get into that business. And does she have the ability to stay put in adversity? Because running a business is not at all easy. Any day I will say leading a company is easier than setting up a business. I mean, and I've done that leading for do not know how many years, right? So that is necessary. See, everything else can be learned, but nobody can teach you how to stay put when the going or when the chips are down. And the reason the first question is very important is, if tech is created for the objective of tech, I mean, as a company, we are not wasting time on it. It's a personal choice. I'm not at all being judgmental. Honestly, nahi samajh mein aata hai. But if somebody tells me कि ये problem है and ये solve हो जाएगा, I get it. So my limitation, and my co-founder and I say, जो we understand, we do. If we don't understand, what am I going to go and tell other investors? Forget others. What am I going to at night tell myself? So very, very simple.